Good evening, everyone. I declare the opening of the Council Members' briefing session at 6:02 on Tuesday, the 11th of July today. Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting today is being held on Whadjuk Noongar Budja, and I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I thank all past and present members of the community that have supported the city to better understand and value Noongar culture within the city of Wanneroo. Please note that the audio-visual proceedings of tonight's meeting will be live broadcast online with the exception of matters discussed behind closed doors. The broadcast of the proceedings of the meeting can be accessed live and on demand through the City of Wanneroo YouTube channel. Item 1, attendances are as per the record. Item 2, apologies and leave of absence. We have an apology from Councillor Berry, Councillor Wright and Councillor Coetzee. Are there any other apologies this evening? Councillor Baker, he's on a leave of absence. And has anyone heard from Councillor Newen? Okay. He might be turning up late. Deputations, we have none. And therefore we go to reports. Declarations of interest by council members, including the nature and extent of which the interests are to be made at the commencement of the item to which the interest relates. Declarations of interest forms are to be completed and handed to the Chief Executive Officer. And we go to Planning and Sustainability Approval Services. Thank you. Mr Dixon.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. There are 2 items from the Planning and Sustainability Directorate on tonight's agenda. I would like to briefly introduce item 4.2, which relates to a development application for a place of worship at 5 Mangano Place in Wanneroo. Mayor, the site is located in a small pocket of light industrial zone land between Wanneroo Road and the Regent's Water Estate. There is a single house and a small vacant warehouse on the site at present. The development application proposes to convert the warehouse to a place of worship with a maximum of 10 people on site on weekdays and 68 people at weekends. There are 19 car parking bays and an additional access point is proposed off Villanova Street. There are also proposed conditions restricting the hours of operation. The application was subject to advertising and we received 158 submissions, 130 in support, 16 people objected and 1 petition objected with 29 signatures, and 11 people provided comments on the proposal but did not state a position. The key concerns raised relate to increased traffic, the new access point off Villanova Street, parking and noise, and I'll quickly address each of those, Mayor. With regard to traffic, the applicant submitted a traffic impact statement which concluded that the additional traffic from the proposed development can be accommodated on the surrounding road network, including Villanova Street, Mangano Place and Backshaw Place. The city's traffic services team has reviewed the information and is satisfied the small increase in traffic will not impact the surrounding area. With regard to parking, the city's parking standards requires 19 bays, and this is what is proposed with the application. With regard to the new access proposed from Villanova Street, administration requested this to be relocated to ensure the retention of an existing tree in the verge, and this is what the applicant has undertaken. So the location of the access point now complies with the separation distances from Wanneroo Road intersection. With regard to noise, the applicants provided an acoustic report which concluded that the noise levels would comply with the noise regulations, and this has been reviewed by the city's environmental health officers who were happy with the findings. Mayor, administration is recommending that the application be approved subject to conditions, which includes restricting the numbers of people using the site and the hours of operation. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do we have any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just one. Mark, on the actual parking side of things, I'm totally satisfied with the 19 bays on site. But should that exceed, I do note that there are some no parking signs on Villanova, etc., on both sides of the street. These can be enforced whereby they, if people do park there, they would be subject to prosecution or a ticket from our rangers in time. And just to make sure that we will be able to adhere to those parking constraints, because I think that's one of the most important things for this particular site, even though the 19 bays meet the requirements.
Thank you, Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, if there are parking restrictions imposed on streets surrounding, then the expectation is that people would abide by those rules. If they don't, then compliance action can be taken.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Are there any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. My question is not so much on just 2 points on what we're being asked to possibly approve next week. One is what you indicated, and that is B, that a maximum of 68 persons are permitted within the place of worship at any one time. Can I just ask how administration deemed it to be 68 people allowed in the building at one time?
Mr Dixon.
That information was provided by the proponent, so it wasn't administration that determined that number. It was the proponent that indicated the number of patrons that will be attending the site.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Any other questions, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you. I guess one of the concerns I have, when we put that in as a condition, it obviously limits the growth of this particular place of worship, where it can fluctuate. It could go up to 150. Does that mean administration's then going to request that these people then come back to council to actually seek an adjustment to that maximum number of persons?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, it's difficult to try and crystal ball gaze as to what might or might not happen in the future. The number of patrons, I think, in this instance has been dictated to an extent by the number of parking bays that are available on site. There's 19 bays. The parking requirement is 4 persons per bay, which comes to the figure of 68. So that's the constraint, I think, with regard to this site. And that's what I think has determined the figure to be 68 patrons on the site at any given time. If the applicant looks to increase that number, then it will be constrained to an extent by parking provision, and council would need to consider any future proposal on its merits. But at the moment, the proposal as submitted complies with the city's car parking requirements, and that's what they've asked for in terms of their application.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do you have another question, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you. And look, thank you, the Director. So the real reason is it's got 19 bays, 4 people per bay, gives you the amount organised. Although the proponent, I'm assuming, could, as indicated by Councillor Civic, that they could, if need be, negotiate something with the neighbouring shopping centre to be able to park vehicles on there, and then obviously increase their numbers. In that case, would they be able to do that? Mr
Dixon?
There would need to be a caveat for a legal right of access and an agreement with the adjoining owners if that were the case. There is parking available on Mangano Place. I think we've calculated there are no parking restrictions on Mangano Place, and there is opportunities for parking to be provided, or for people to use the parking on Mangano Place, particularly at weekends when it's less busy in and around that area. But that certainly isn't forming part of this application, as I've mentioned. And council is required to assess what is presented to council. In this case, they've asked for 68 patrons, and that complies with our standards.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do you have another question, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And the other point that I wanted to ask about, because this is an existing site that's been used for many, many years, in the recommendation is that they're going to have to make sure that there's stormwater drainage on that site if it's not already there. So I'm assuming there is some level of stormwater drainage on that site, but we're putting it as a condition that they have to have enough drainage for the 100-year storm over 24 hours. And I'm assuming, is that because they're going to redo the car parking, or is the car parking already in place?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, that's a standard condition that administration recommends imposed on each application, just to make sure that there is adequate stormwater drainage contained within the site and it doesn't cause any issues off-site.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? If there are no more questions, are there any questions on item 4.1? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It's good to see this coming back again. Mr Dixon, can you just, just to clarify for me, in changing our policy, can we then have, bearing in mind the issue that we have, as you're aware, in some of our newer suburbs with the driveway lengths, how is this policy going to help eliminate the possible issues of cars overhanging the footpaths, and how do we police that?
Mr Dixon.
Firstly, in terms of existing development, it won't help. This is really a policy that will guide future development proposals and to ensure that we have an adequate length of space in front of a garage to be able for residents to park their cars. So it can't go retrospectively and address issues that have already been created. In terms of compliance, I think having liaised with our rangers, I think the approach that, and I think this has been mentioned before, the approach that we take is one of education. We try and educate and inform people that are causing an issue with parking over a footpath to ask our residents not to do that and work with them to find alternative parking arrangements. If it then escalates and that doesn't result in an outcome, then ultimately there's the opportunity for the city's rangers to infringe, but that is a last resort. Really, it's more about the city working with residents to try and help them address parking issues as and when they arise.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. You have another question, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, just to wind it up. So this policy, and I guess this is just for anybody that might be listening, I'm listening, obviously it's going to take great effect for all of the new subdivisions in East Wanneroo, but pretty much I think the northern corridor, all those structure plans and what have you have already been agreed to, so it doesn't affect any of that. Would that be correct?
Mr Dixon.
Certainly in terms of future development in East Wanneroo, this policy would apply. In terms of the Northern Coastal Growth Corridor, if there is an existing development on the ground and it's been approved, or if there is an existing approval but has yet to be built, then this policy would not apply. But if there are future subdivision proposals or development applications, then this policy would apply. And that is how we would ensure for the vast majority of that coastal corridor that hasn't yet been developed, that they will comply with the requirements of this policy.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mark, in regards to this particular policy, just for clarity, that would the main purpose of this is to actually hopefully get a setback which is adequate so that a vehicle is not going to overhang onto the footpath or whatever. So in that case, will that also alter the lot size of these blocks, even under R30, R40 coding? Will that make these blocks slightly larger so that it can accommodate for that parking setback to be increased, and also the lot size?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor. So not necessarily the lot size. What it will ensure is that the setback is sufficient for wherever the garage is located, is set back sufficiently so that there is at least 4.5 metres, which should be sufficient for most cars to be able to park in front of a garage. And that is in effect in accordance with the R codes, but not the RMD codes.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Are there any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Herridge.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a quick one. Just to confirm, so if this is all approved next week at ordinary, there's no further approvals that go through, it starts from then?
Mr Dixon?
Correct, yeah, the policy would, as soon as council hopefully endorses the policy, then at that point any applications that the city receives, any subdivisions will be assessed against that policy.
Thank you. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, thank you, Mr Dixon and Mr Bowring. We now move to assets. Good evening, Mr Singh. Would you like to speak to any of these items?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I have two reports on the agenda tonight, but I'm happy to answer any questions on either of them.
Thank you. Do I have any questions on item 4.3? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
I love pedestrian access ways just as much as I like bus shelters. Mr Singh, I sent a couple of questions through today. The first one is just around how the report often cites that pedestrian access ways are well utilised. Do we have any data that backs up that statement other than just the anecdotal evidence that we collect, given that it seems to be something that is used to evaluate whether they should remain open or closed?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. No, we don't do pedestrian counts for the PAWs as a matter of practice. If we have to do that, then we don't have that kind of equipment in-house to do that. We'll have to engage specialist contractors to do that work.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
And just one other question, Mayor, it relates to, Director, is there a policy that is in place that guides how we either regulate or decide whether these PAWs do remain open or not? Because I know some councillors here who represent established suburbs, we see a large number of them in those areas, and increasingly over the last couple of years we've received complaints and requests for closure. So is there a guiding policy that regulates what the threshold is to consider closure? And if so, what is the review date scheduled for that policy?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. The city doesn't have a policy of its own which regulates the PAW statuses. In the established suburbs, the PAW has been constructed previously as part of the subdivisions when the area was developed. In the newer subdivisions, the POSs actually include PAWs. So basically, rather than having a footpath connection from two streets, generally the new PAWs in the newer subdivisions are an incorporated part of the POS. So city's local planning policy covers those, but not the historical ones. Historical ones were constructed under the subdivision approvals.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
And just one final question. So it's somewhat outlined in the report, Director, but that the factors that are considered when administration makes a recommendation to either support closure or object to it, it would be things like predicted usage of the PAW, the level of complaints that have been received from the residents, and the proximity to transport networks like bus stops. Those would be the factors generally that are considered in making a recommendation.
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, that's true. The main factor we consider in looking at whether PAW is required or not is pedestrian connectivity. Is it providing enough, like within walkable catchment for people who live in those streets? If they need to get to the nearest attraction, maybe bus stop, school, shopping center, or other areas of interest, they remain within walkable catchment. Should a PAW get close, that catchment, obviously, they'll have to walk longer distances. That's not desirable.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is, of the 4 maintenance visits that occurred recently, to what extent was there damage and was it to do with graffiti or antisocial behaviour? I'm just wondering if that's motivated the most recent request to have this closed. Thank you.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. The most of the PAWs, and especially this particular one, we haven't had instances which required significant intervention. So most of them have been the usual maintenance, like maintenance servicing, which includes when we go there, look for, do the normal slashing of removal of vegetation, removal of any illegal dumping, if any, and look for any damage to footpaths, if there is any. Then the further works arranged to remediate that damage. In this instance, in the last 12 months, we haven't had any significant damage at that site.
Any other questions on this item? If there are no other questions, are there any questions on item 4.4? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just to ask the Director, as part of this report, you're indicating that you've been trialling the new asphalt look concrete. I can't say that I've seen that, but is it asphalt that you're laying in that place, or is it concrete that's being laid?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. They're normally the coloured concrete footpaths. So they look like, give a red coloured asphalt look. But we have also constructing asphalt paths as well. For where there is a predominant cyclist use, we tend to use asphalt.
Thank you. Any Councillor Miles, do you have another question?
Yeah, just on that, I just noticed quite a lot of the, and whilst I understand why the city uses concrete, it's not my favourite material because of the environmental impact of it. I much prefer, obviously, as you said before, the asphalt. I noticed that quite a few parks, when I was doing a bit of a tour with Councillor Huntley recently, that quite a few paths are being lifted and cracked and damaged. The repair costs of concrete clearly is a lot higher, and you indicate in this report that the cost has gone up. And I'm assuming that's part of the reason. So are you looking at replacing concrete in the longer term with some other form? Because you're only asking for a 12-month extension anyway.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Normally, the concrete paths get replaced with concrete. The cost which is mentioned in this report on page 122 is not necessarily for the maintenance works. It is predominantly for our capital works program for new footpaths. The cost has gone up, not just yes, there has been some cost increases in cost for the various contracts. That is part of it, but that's very small part in this one. Our overall expenditure on concrete footpaths has gone up with the new projects being approved in the capital works program. So when the tender was originally awarded, the anticipation was that it will be within the $5 million overall expenditure over a 3-year contract, and that was under CEO's delegation. CEO approved that tender. Given we done higher volume of works, that's resulted in that it's likely to exceed. Hence, it's come to council for extension. It is not predominantly due to the maintenance expenditures.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any other questions on this item? If there are no other questions, thank you, Mr Singh. We move on to community in place. Rowan. Yeah. Yeah. I know, yeah. You told me already. Okay, welcome, Mr Clem and Mr Starbucks. Mr Clem, would you like to speak to any of the items on the agenda this evening?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, councillors. Yes, I will introduce one item, and that's item 4.6, the East Wanneroo Community Facilities Plan. The East Wanneroo Community Facilities Plan was originally endorsed by Council as a draft document in April 2018. It was included in a suite of district structure plan documentation released for public comment at the time. Also at the time, the State Planning Policy 3.6 infrastructure contributions was under review, and the outcome of that review was that the policy would focus on district and neighbourhood level community facility provision, not district and regional provision as expected at the time. Consequently, the East Wanneroo Community Facilities Plan has been reviewed in light of the revised policy, and the updated plan also considers cost estimates for the provision of the community facility infrastructure, including land acquisition, and compares this to the anticipated funding that would be available from developer contribution plans based on the policy's cap of $5,000 per dwelling. It is noted that the Community Facilities Plan is a guiding document and the actual provision, including timing and location, would evolve as other informing plans such as local structure plans and public transport plans are developed. And each individual facility would also be subject to detailed needs and feasibility assessments and master planning processes. Thank you, Mayor, and Mr Starwatts and I are happy to take questions on the reports.
Thank you. Do I have any questions on item 4.6 to start off with? Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm pleased that this has come up at this point in time. My only question is that identifying all of these sites for the city's requirements, will administration be working with the Department of Planning to ensure that those sites will be able to be secured under the structure plan at some time in the future? Because obviously we're going to have to work with the developers to make sure that these are identified, and part of the costs, developer contribution costs, will alleviate the problems that may arise.
Thank you. I understand Mr Dixon is quite happy to respond to this, if you're okay with that, Mr Clem. Mr Dixon?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yes, in short, the answer to the question is we will work with proponents. We'll also shortly be receiving the district-level developer contributions plan, which Council will need to consider as a scheme amendment to embed that in our scheme. And that will be a guiding document in terms of the location and the type and nature of facilities that we will provide within East Wanneroo.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is, obviously when the policy 3.6 was changed and we went from district and neighbourhood instead of regional, would that have any negative impact on the fact that we are growing East Wanneroo and it's going to have 150,000 people in there, or is a district and neighbourhood acceptable?
Mr Clem, Mr Dixon has offered to answer that question as well. Mr Dixon, would you like to respond?
So this is really about what can and can't be included within the developer contributions plan. So the State Planning Policy 3.6 makes it very clear that regional level facilities are not facilities that can and should be included in developer contributions plan. That's not to say that those facilities won't be needed and will still need to be provided for the local community. What it does mean is that the city will need to work with other stakeholders to ensure that there are funding mechanisms in place to assist in the delivery of those facilities, in the same way that the ARC facility is being provided in Alkimos. It's a similar approach for that.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do you have another question, Councillor Huntley?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to clarify that, does that mean then that the policy really only looks at contributions rather than the facilities that are going in there?
Mr Dixon?
As in developer contributions?
Yeah, so what this community facilities plan does is that it identifies both regional and district level facilities that are going to be required to service the population of 150,000 residents. The distinction between the community facilities plan and the future developer contributions plan is that the developer contributions plan will only fund the district level facilities. It will not fund the regional level facilities. So council, as I mentioned, council will need to work with state and federal government to look at opportunities for funding mechanisms to assist in the timely delivery of those regional facilities that are identified in this community facilities plan.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do we have any other questions on this item? I'll give you one more question, Councillor Huntley, and then I see Deputy Mayor Truby has a question.
So where will Wanneroo stand in the fact that it is a city with no regional contributions, or is this a normal thing that regional contributions do not come from developer contributions?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, yeah, it's a normal thing. So if you notice for Yanchep and Two Rocks and Alkimos Eglinton, those developer contribution plans, They do not include regional facilities. The state planning policy is very clear that developer contribution plans should not include regional facilities.
Deputy Mayor Treby.
Thank you very much, and I suppose part way to responding is the Metropolitan Regional Improvement Fund, I think it was, MRIF, was set aside to look at, with its main funding source being land tax, is set aside for regional scale investment. And would also be remiss of me to not point out, and there is a question coming, to not point out that the city was successful in lobbying ALGA only a few short weeks ago to actually get ALGA to lobby on behalf of all local governments for a fund for regional scale facilities, as was approved by this council. So that was a good bonus. My question is just noting the amounts that have been identified in the report, and also noting that State Planning Policy 3.6 is a fixed sum and there is no escalation mechanism within the policy. The costs that have been identified, are they the net present value at the proposed and taking into account when those facilities might be constructed, or are they simply at 2023 prices or values?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. My understanding is that escalation has been included in those costs, but I will clarify that prior to next week's meeting.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Deputy Mayor Treby, do you have another question? No. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Mr Clem, can I ask you, we've been presented a couple of different, I guess, versions of what council expectation was for facilities in East Wanneroo, and we've obviously got this one here tonight. Is it possible to show us, maybe next week or in the coming weeks, what is the difference between the two? Now we know what the funding is roughly, so we can see what has dropped out and what we may need to be able to fund from other sources. So because sometimes you know, from this report, it's the latest report, but we'd like to see what's been taken out, if anything, from the previous reports. Is that easy to do?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we can provide a summary comparison to the previous community facilities plan if there's been any changes.
Thank you, Mr Clem. Yes, Councillor Miles.
And the other question I have, bearing in mind it's been suggested tonight that we could possibly get funding from the Metropolitan Improvement Fund. Has the administration been applying for that fund already so we can start acquiring the regional sporting land?
Mr Clem.
I'd need to check that, through you, Mayor. I'd need to check that, but I don't believe so, but we'll investigate that and respond to that.
Thank you. Do you want to speak to it, Mr CEO?
Just through you, Mayor, we certainly have been advocating the role of WAPC in acquiring the various regional open spaces throughout the city. And as the East Wanneroo structure plan progresses, we'll turn our attention to that advocacy role. For East Wanneroo, we've been quite successful in terms of our advocacy role in terms of the Northern Coastal Growth Corridor.
Thank you. Councillor Herridge.
Thanks, Mayor. Just something a little bit more specific than the overarching. I was looking at the hard courts that we have in the report. Do the hard courts, being that I've also noted that East Wanneroo will come under regional, some part of it with Kingsway, knowing what it's like at the moment, and time will change. A couple of questions, I suppose, in one. The hard courts, multi-use, they're regional. Where does the school hard courts actually sit in those as well? Do they come into the POS, or are they in any way, shape, can help with any of that?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the district level court infrastructure, which I think is below 8 courts, where possible, they will be situated as a high school facility, so that would form that provision as part of a high school facility, whereas the regional infrastructure, which is above 8 courts, that would be on the city to provide the land and that infrastructure.
Any other questions? If there are no more questions, we'll go to item 4.5 first, the Wanneroo Recreation Centre. Do I have any questions on this item? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I noticed on page 126, it mentioned establishes a youth public art wall, which creates the centre's identity. Could you clarify what you mean by a youth public art wall? Is that, for example, some might think where that's a designated area that youth can come and practice their art, or if that's more like a piece that you've got on the design on page 130, which is kind of like a set design, I guess that's more targeted at youth.
Mr. Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. It is more of a piece that we would work with the youth community to install as part of the construction of the facility.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions, Councillor Smith? There you go.
Thank you. Just one more question. With the two buildings that would be connected, do you envisage patrons, when they're using the facility, moving between the older and the new hub? And if so, has there been any thought to perhaps undercover pathway between them in case that there is a lot of that walking between the two?
Mr. Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. The two facilities would be connected via pathways. At this stage, there's no plans for there to be anything undercover of that nature. But when the second, and if the second facility evolves as the community hub, then that could be looked at in the design of that stage.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you tell us how many clubs actually use the recreation centre at the moment?
Mr. Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. I can. I just have that information here somewhere. So within the Wanneroo Recreation Centre, there are a total of 9 booking groups, and the average hours per week is 153.25 hours of use.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Huntley.
When the new building is built and the old building then is demolished to make way for the stage 2, what will happen with the clubs in the meantime when that's going on? Because obviously it's going to take a little bit of time to build that recreation centre again.
Mr. Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. And typically when we have these scenarios where a facility is redeveloped or refurbished, then we do provide relocation opportunities for all community groups. So we work with those community groups to assess their needs, try and find a suitable location as close as possible to their current location while those works are undertaken.
Thank you, Mr. Clem. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I am surprised to see this come before us tonight. I didn't think we're anywhere near this stage last time I was involved in the forums that we've been having. But having said that, one of my concerns was, which we was told by administration, and you may have overcome it, and hence why this report's come to us, we were told that we couldn't add on or to the existing footprint of that building due to the Aboriginal heritage and the Yalagonda Regional Park baseline. So has administration got over that hurdle?
Mr. Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. The situation with the existing Wanneroo recreation site is it is constrained with its footprint. Some of those factors are around particularly the trees, the close proximity of the trees. So that was one factor. Aboriginal heritage elements, they are, I guess, aspects that through the community engagement process, which is intended to be the next step of this process, those engagements with Aboriginal elders and Aboriginal groups will occur, and we'll be able to establish then what, if there are any issues around that.
Thank you, Mr Clem. Do we have any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
So with that being said, that's why I was surprised, because we was told by administration that they were the constraints at the time. The other concern I have is that as councillors in and around the Central Ward, and I know Councillor Zvitten gets the same comment as well as Councillor Huntley, we're going to be taking some more green grassed area from an area, especially in the town side here, and I consider this still part of the town side, where we're quite restricted for space for, and it says in this report that you're going to realign or move the soccer field further to the south. I guess you're still yet to have that conversation with those groups to make sure we're not going to make those grounds too small.
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Scenic Park would have to reduce in size for this facility to be constructed. At the moment, it gets minimal use. There's, I think, 3 user groups on the site, one summer, one winter, and so they're both sporting clubs, and a dog training group. So it has minimal usage of around about 7 to 8 hours per week at the site. So there is the ability to realign the soccer pitch, which is predominantly what that site is, so that a soccer pitch, albeit a bit smaller in size, could still function on that space with the facility there.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Miles.
Yep. And why I asked that of administration is because the planning director has been advising us of the growth that's just happening on the other side of this building with the Ingham site having another 1,000 dwellings, Banara site, Cape Horn Street. We know that we're going to get probably another 3,000 to 4,000 families move into the area, and I'm a bit reluctant in utilising green space for buildings, and I think the original intent was for the recreation centre to go up a level to accommodate all this extra space needed. I know there's a cost to it, but we can't replace the green areas that we're looking at of taking away for this building.
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. And just on the Wanneroo Rec Centre, in terms of the additional levels, there were some challenges involved in going up the 2 to 3 levels that we would need to accommodate all of the different aspects of a facility for all the different user groups at that site. There is a further greenfield space further south of Scenic Park. I think it's also called Scenic Park. The infrastructure on that particular site is not extensive to support a whole lot of different sporting usage, so some additional infrastructure to that site would help to accommodate additional need based on those additional populations moving into the area. And then the existing Scenic Park site where the proposed facility would go, with that rescoping of the soccer pitch and some future addition of infrastructure such as some floodlights, and it could be serviced by the toilets within the proposed facility, then it would actually be a more usable space than it is currently.
Thank you, Mr Clem. Councillor Svitten.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Rowan, my question relates to the Aboriginal Development Heritage Act, etc. Now that has been passed and gone through state parliament, now has an impact on the state per se across the board. I guess my question is, do you foresee any possible impact that may have on this particular site now that has happened? I'm not saying that there will be or won't be, but the fact is it's going to go out to public consultation now, and there may be some impact from that, or there may not be. So that's my question, yes.
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a process that we will go through in regards to the Aboriginal Heritage Act that's just been implemented, or the changes to the Act. That would occur after the engagement in the consultation stage, and if the project is supported beyond that, then that is a process we would go through at that stage to assess what that impact is.
Thank you, Mr Clem. Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just looking at the whole project, there's still only actually 2 courts, so replacing the 2 courts that we have existingly. With 150,000 people moving into one of the areas, plus we've got other areas as well, this is going to be the only rec centre in Wanneroo town centre, isn't it? So is this the only provision we're going to have, is 2 courts for all of these people? Or are we still planning to do something with Leach Road?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. This proposed facility would be in place of any proposals at Leach Road. The current concept design includes 2 courts, whereas Wanneroo Rec Centre at the moment only has 1 court, so it would be an additional court on top of what currently exists. I guess the overall provision of courts in the greater Wanneroo area could be addressed in the future through what we've seen in the East Wanneroo Community Facilities Plan.
Thank you, Mr Clem. I've just got a couple of questions. First of all, with the new land being developed at Ingham's and all that through that area there, is there land allocated for recreation space and ovals within that area as well? And is there planning throughout that area for ovals and additional recreation space there? Mr Dixon.
Through you, mate. Yes, there is. There is in the structure plan, the Cell 2 structure plan, there is additional open space which will be provided as part of the development of the land around Ingham's and the Servites land.
And that additional open space is for the increased population in that area, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. One other question I've got, just to confirm, we are not belting down the current recreation centre at this point in time. That will stay there, and we will build, from what I understand, the new project, and then there is stage 2 on the new project, which will enable us to move the Scouts and the boxing club out of their outdated, unserviceable facilities as well. And so it actually increases the number of facilities available for the community in that area. Is that correct, Mr Clem?
Yes, Mayor, that is correct.
And you can just confirm that we're not getting rid of a basketball court, that we are actually adding 2 basketball courts in this plan, so that confirm that we have 3 basketball courts instead of 1 at the moment.
Yes, Mayor, that's correct. So the existing Wanneroo Recreation Centre would remain through the stage 1 and 2 of the Sports Hub development. That's correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Deputy Mayor Treby.
Thank you, Mayor Aiken. Just in respect of the discussion we've had that's come up around the Ingham's area and the additional land, because I did hear the response. Can the Director of Planning confirm that that public open space is actually adult size active sporting spaces?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, I will take that question on notice. There is a new primary school that's been identified, and there's open space that's been identified, a minimum of 10% within the site, but I will confirm for Councillor Treby the intended size and scale of the open space and whether that's sufficient for a senior size oval.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, do you have another question?
I just asked that question because with respect to the Education Department's building provisions and supply provisions, if it's a primary school that's usually junior size, it would be refreshing if it were senior size. Even if it's shared, It's only junior sites. But that notwithstanding, I look forward to the response. And secondly, just in whether it's Mr Clem or Mr Dixon, I'm not too sure, just confirming that with most of the developments that we've had historically through the city that we're talking about here, we would typically undertake an ethnographic study and look at all of the necessary approvals that would necessarily need to be in place as well, and that has been part of past practice.
Mr Clem or Mr Dixon? Who would like to respond to that? Mr Dixon.
Thank you for looking over to me, Mr Clem. I appreciate that. I will take that question on notice. I think the answer is yes, but I will take it on notice and provide a full and detailed response to Councillor Treby. Deputy Mayor Treby.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So can I just clarify, you've actually said that there will be 3 courts, obviously 2 that we're going to build in stage 1, and then we'll have the existing court left in the old building. But when we knock that building down and then we put the second phase up, will that then have a new court in it? Because that's not clear on our diagram. So are we going to have 3 at the end or 2?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. The concept design for that facility hasn't been developed yet, so that's a consideration we can make at that time when we go through that concept design process.
So at the moment you can confirm that there will be actually 2, not 3 at the moment, until we know the concept plan?
Through you, Mayor, no, there'll be the 2 new ones, plus the existing court within Wanneroo Rec Centre, and that the Wanneroo Rec Centre won't change until we finalise a concept plan for what that facility would look like in the future and then construct that facility.
But that concept plan at the moment doesn't have anything in it. So technically there would be 2 courts at this, after stage 1, and the old rec centre is standing, there will be 3, but when until we obviously get that concept plan, there are only actually 2 in the plan at the moment. Is that correct?
I guess in a sense it is correct, but that facility won't go anywhere, and with the single court, the existing Wanneroo Rec Centre won't go anywhere until that concept plan is finalised and endorsed. So that 3rd court will always be there until that point in time.
Yeah.
And Mr Clem, how long do you envisage the original rec centre standing before we would be acting on revising it? Would we be looking at 10 years before that would be finalised and dealt with, the old one?
Thank you, Mayor. That would be subject to our success through our advocacy approaches, I think. And once we've secured that additional funding, the additional $25 million funding, which I think is referred in the report, that's when we'd be in a position to finalise our concept plan and our scope and then proceed with construction of that facility.
Thank you, Mr Clem. Did you have another question, Councillor Huntley?
Yeah, just very quickly, Mayor. So can you give us a time frame for that funding? Where are we looking for funding right now for that 25 million?
For you,
Mr.
Mayor,
CEO.
I think, so we're currently about to present to Council a revised advocacy strategy, so that will be the time for Council to decide what the advocacy priorities are. However, this is an already established project, so advocacy is always ongoing for our standing projects.
Thank you. Councillor Huntley.
So can I just clarify that right now we have no funding at the moment?
Mr CEO.
For you, Mayor, we have funding for stage 1, which is what the report is seeking Council's determination on. The other stages are subject to further concept development by Council and adoption of that concept in costings and then advocacy.
Thank you. Yes, Deputy Mayor Treby.
For clarification, if I could just ask, the purpose of this report is to simply seek an endorsement of attachment 1 as the guiding design and then to go out to public advertising. That's the purpose of this report.
Mr Clem, can you please confirm that?
Yes, Mayor, that's correct. That's the recommendation in the report.
Yeah, just in case we were
Deputy
going
Mayor
down
Treby?
too many rabbit holes. That's just, I thought I'd ask that.
Yes. Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to, on an answer Mr Clem made to Councillor Civic, re the possible new Aboriginal Heritage Act implications, can I just ask maybe that administration would just check that first before we go out to the groups and the community advocating that we want to build this nice new facility, and we may get stumped before we even get to the next stage. So can I just ask administration, maybe the CEO, if he could get that part of it done prior to it going out for public consultation?
Mr CEO.
Through you, Mayor, there has always been a requirement to liaise and consult on Aboriginal heritage and culture matters previously to the new Act, and now a different, a more detailed and different approach, which we need to follow for all our works that impact. It's important first to understand the project is live, the community support the project, and council endorses the project to then take it to the second stage, which includes many approvals. If environmental clearing is required, then environmental clearing permits are required, and other approvals, including Aboriginal cultural heritage approvals.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? There are no more questions on this item. Do we have any questions on item 4.7? Councillor Miles.
Just a quick one. Thank you, Mayor. I understand it's state government funding, and I understand the funding was originally given to the Wanneroo Football Club, amateur football club, is my understanding, and these were election commitments made by the local member at the time. The only question I have is, I guess, this 2.5 years down the track, it seems to have taken a long time before we're sort of getting to this point, and administration's yet to obviously dig a hole. So it's probably going to be another 12 months. So it seems a bit long to me to be able to do these commitments. Is there a reason for that, or is this just normal practice?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. This project, the Dugouts project, the funding's actually linked to one of the other projects mentioned in the report, which is the solar panels project. It's taken some time to undertake some research and some work around what the scope of that solar panel project could look like and should look like, and that project is that scope's now finalised and it's about to go to RFQ. So there's a bit more certainty now around what the scope and the available funding for the dugouts actually looks like. So that's why this report's now coming up and we can proceed with the dugout project.
Thank you. Any more questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
I appreciate that part of it, but 2.5 years just to do some some engineering, looking at the building to if it can take the panels, and I'm assuming the dugout is a fairly straightforward process.
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. There are several projects that all for the showgrounds area that were all part of the state government funding commitment at that time as a result of the 2021 election, and we've been working on various projects. They've been interlinked to some extent. So in terms of our ability to finalise scopes with the club has been a little bit protracted and a bit longer than what we would normally expect. But we are now at a point where 3 of those key projects are at that, not so much a final stage, we're at that closer stage where we're ready for RFQ and construction.
Thank you, Mr Clem. Did you want to speak to it, Mr CEO?
Perhaps I could ask an additional question of Mr Clem, but I think you touched on it before. I guess there are 2 sorts of projects that we receive grant funding for. There are projects which the city receives direct grant funding for and we have autonomy of delivery, and then there are projects where other clubs receive funding or that funding is dependent on working with local clubs, and those project delivery times can be longer than where there are projects that the city receives direct funding for. Is that correct?
Mr Clem.
Thanks, Mr CEO. Yes, that's correct. And usually if the funding's coming straight to the city, we're already well advanced in our planning for what that project would look like in terms of its scope. whereas when the money goes directly to the clubs as part of the funding commitment, we need to spend a bit more time with the club or the group to finalise what that scope might be and work through that process of the very initial project stages, which does take some time.
And for you, Mayor, perhaps we could seek one further clarification. Mr Clem, would your suggestion be that once we've received support from the club on the scope and specifications and approval from the funding body on those specifications, delivery occurs quite quickly?
Mr Clem?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Mr CEO, that it then falls in line with our normal capital works program and project processes in that we undertake it in accordance with our project management schedule, so it does start to move quickly once we finalise those matters.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions on this item, I would like to go to Community Safety and Emergency Management Reports, item 4.8. Are there any questions on item 4.8? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. I just have two questions on this, but they're somewhat interrelated. The first is, my understanding is that while it is a coastal lookout point that has been referenced in the report, primarily it is also a residential street. Is administration aware of a precedent where the city supports the installation of CCTV in an area that's primarily a residential street? I might just ask that as the first question, Mayor.
Mr Stowitz?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Generally along our coast and in residential areas, there is no precedent for CCTV infrastructure. Most of our cameras and CCTV assets are focused in town centres and hotspots or major precincts like Kingsway. In this area of coastline, there are some CCTV assets primarily focused on car parks and automatic gates, mainly to ensure that those gates operate effectively and that people can get out if they get stuck.
Thank you, Mr Stowitz. Councillor Rowe.
And then the last question, Mayor, it draws back to the fact that I remember we were briefed on an issue to do with Fred Stubbs' car park recently. So my question would be, does administration have a comment about the provision of CCTV within the suburb of Quinns Rocks or in that sort of area itself? Because it seems to be a pattern, I'd say, that's coming before us in the last 6 to 12 months.
Mr Stowitz.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the question, Councillor Rowe. Look, a lot of those coastal assets do get used and sometimes do attract antisocial behaviour, particularly after hours. We find that we get a lot of impact or bang for our buck using our mobile CCTV cameras or site sentries, and often when we do place those cameras in hotspots or areas where we get feedback of antisocial behaviour, that behaviour stops very quickly. In this instance, that was the case. When we received the petition, we put mobile cameras in place and then the behaviour did cease. And we use those mobile cameras to inform, I guess, where we might make a more permanent investment. So generally along Quinns Rocks and along those coastal areas, we don't see any trends that are dissimilar to what we might experience in other parts of the city.
Thank you, Mr Stowitz. Do we have any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor. I do know the area well. The homes are pretty close to where the parkings are. In this instance, would it be perhaps possible to discuss with the residents if they had surveillance on their homes? Because I know that can now actually be used by the police. Is that not an option in this area? Because it's not a very big area. And as I say, the homes are really close. If you had a couple of the homes with their own surveillance, I think it would probably be even better than the CCTV.
Mr Stowitz.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the question. Yeah, the city's assets generally don't focus on private residents, generally only focus on public space. And you're correct, often private CCTV installations do provide better coverage of immediate surrounds. So I guess in addition to the items that we listed in the report as well as measures, we may be able to look to address the antisocial behaviour in the long run. While we might look at investment in that area, we could certainly add to that list engaging with residents to see who may have private CCTV installations and whether some of that footage may be available to support any responses to behaviour that's not appropriate there.
Thank you, Mr Storwarts. Yes, Councillor Parker.
I'm just going to try and phrase this as a question. I know we had a discussion about this earlier on where we were perhaps going to have homes that we gave a certain amount of money to. I think that would really work well in this instance. How do I make that into a question? Would that work well in this instance? I think you have, in fact, actually answered it. Thanks very much.
Mr Storwarts.
Thank you, Mayor. Are you referring to CCTV rebate programs? Yeah, that is something we have been investigating, and certainly if that were to be installed and rolled out, that would support, I guess, that sort of program where private CCTV installations can support our public networks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mr Storwarts, would the city be able to suggest this with the CC, because that was rolled out, I think, in our budget, with the CC, suggest it to the residents as an option before we went ahead and put that infrastructure in such a small spot? Would you be able to suggest that as well?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, there have been funds approved in the 23-24 budget to investigate the CCTV rebate program over the course of this year. Hopefully by the end of this year we'll be looking at the resources required to deliver that and the terms of conditions that may apply. So I think over the course of that period we can engage with these residents, and if we're in a position to offer that program at that time, we'll do so.
Thank you, Mr Storwarts. Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. So this location has been suggested for year 8. I just wanted to know, how does this location compare needs-wise to the other ones listed on the expansion program? Thank you.
Mr Storwarts.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your question. I think most of the items listed on the city's programs in years 1 to 7 are I guess predominantly city assets where there's a lot of usage and often do attract large amounts of antisocial behaviour, skate parks, community centres and playing fields and so on. We try and assess requests or hotspots as they come in based on consultation with local police, stats that we have on reports or complaints of antisocial behaviour, and prioritise those accordingly. From our perspective, the ones listed in the early years are a high priority at this stage based on the number of complaints and feedback that we've had, but we do reprioritise as we go on an annual basis.
Thank you, Mr Storwarts. Do we have any other questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Reading the report, it doesn't look like it's an urgent item that's really coming before us, because you're not looking at building it for 7 years. I just find it a bit strange that with such low numbers, you're talking about 11 customer base because there's some parking down there. And also the fact that the police have only requested it 3 times. I'm just trying to understand how you've assessed it as a number 8, as you previously said to Councillor Smith. Either it needs to be lifted higher, or maybe not at all.
Mr Storwarts.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Miles. We did receive the petition on this item. The petition did list a number of activities that were inappropriate in that location. As I mentioned earlier, they were reduced when we put the mobile sentry there. We've listed it in year 8. The way we generally roll out our program is we will look at feasibility and need in, I guess, the year before that, and if we determine that that's required at that stage, we'll proceed with implementation the next year. So at this stage, we don't see any issue with listing it on the program, but it may be that over time it might not be required.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. So fellow councillor brought up the possibility of CCTV and houses. From your perspective, at the previous tower that was there and your knowledge of the area, would CCTV from houses be able to pick up the footpath at Waterland Point, or would bushes be interfering with visibility of said antisocial behaviour?
Mr Stewarts.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it would depend on the design of the system, where the cameras were located and whether those residents wanted to locate cameras that looked over that space. We'd have to take a good look at which properties might have that opportunity and whether they were interested in doing that, perhaps in consultation, as Councillor Parker suggested.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, do I have any questions on the new local cat law 2023, item 4.9? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I was wondering, would it be appropriate to add a fourth recommendation in your opinion that would state that we will continue to advocate to state government through Walgar for changes to the Cat Act to increase the powers of local government to empower us to restrict cat movement a bit more?
Mr Stewarts.
Thank you, Mayor. We have already requested Walgar include an item on their August meeting to do just that. If Council wish to add a recommendation to note that or request that ongoing advocacy continue, then it could do so.
Thank you. Any other questions? If there are no other questions on that item, thank you. We're going to corporate strategy and performance. So, Ms Jennings. Good evening, Ms Jennings. Do you have any items you wish to speak to this evening?
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. No, I have the 2 May financial reports, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Do I have any questions on item 4.10? There are no questions on item 4.10. Do I have any questions on item 4.11? Just wait for Councillor Smith to check. Councillor Smith?
Yeah, thank you. Not sure if it's in this one or the one before, but on page... Where are we going? Page 304.5, materials and contracts year to date, it mentioned a leak at Kingsway Sporting Complex. I was just wondering if that's now fixed. Maybe that's the wrong page.
Through the Mayor, is that in the warrants item? I'm just trying to find the...
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, that's page 316.
Oh, 316.
Yeah, sorry, wrong one.
Mr Singh, are you able to respond to that one? Page 316, year to date, the unfavourable variance of 134 is mainly due to higher water charges due to a water leak at Kingsway Sporting Complex.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I don't have the details with me. I'll have to take that on notice.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any other questions on these items? If there are no more questions, thank you, Ms Jennings. We now go to Chief Executive Office, Governance and Legal, item 4.2, request of extension of council policies. Would you like to speak to that, Mr CEO?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I'm happy to take questions on this very well-written report.
Does anyone have any questions on this report this evening? Okay, there are no questions on this report. Move on to item 5, motions on notice. Item 5.1, I have a motion on notice about safe pedestrian crossing facilities by main roads for Marmion Avenue at Shorehaven Boulevard and Santorini Promenade. And we also have a motion on notice coming next week from Councillor Rowe, and that'll be about undergrounding power in Girraween. Late reports, we have there to be circulated under a separate cover, and we don't have any. Public question time, there's no one in the gallery this evening. Confidential, item 8.1, strategic land opportunity. So this is a confidential session, so we need to go off air. Item 9, the date of the next meeting, Ordinary Council meeting, has been scheduled for 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 18th of July 2023 to be held at Council Chambers, Civic Centre, 23 Dundebar Road, Wanneroo. Item 10, closure. Thank you for your attendance, and I now declare the briefing session closed at 7:45. Thank you, everyone.